Hi everyone, welcome back. So today I'm going to be talking about historical romance novels. I really enjoy watching those videos in which people suggest books inspired by a season or a holiday or a festivity such as Halloween. So I decided to create this list with some of my favorite historical romance novels to share them with you for St. Valentine's Day. The first novel on my list is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. I always think about North and South as a novel for intellectuals because it tackles some very important sociological concepts. The story is a great example of conflict theory and feminist theory, and the characters always have very intense discussions about class and human rights. The story also shows how complex class divisions were in the Victorian era, and the setting is very realistic. Also, for a historical novel, there's a lot of romantic tension, which is not really common in historical romance novels. The novel is about the clash between the North and the South. This is the story of Margaret Hale and John Thornton. Margaret comes from the South and John is from the North. Margaret moved with her parents to the industrial town of Milton after her father decides to quit the church to become a teacher. Mr. Thornton is a mill owner in Milton and he has hired Margaret's father to be his tutor. Although Margaret and Mr. Thornton are attracted to each other, they refuse to acknowledge their feelings because their political views clash. As often happens in historical romance novels, the conflict is propelled by prejudices. Margaret thinks Mr. Thornton is the typical northern bourgeois who built his wealth by exploiting poor people, who is ruthless and who doesn't care about his workers. Mr. Thornton thinks Margaret is the typical southerner who comes from the aristocracy and lives from all money and is lazy and doesn't like people who work or doesn't like self-made people. They are both quite wrong. Mr. Thornton actually didn't go to school because he had to work from a very young age to support his family. He is also one of the few mill owners who actually care about the working conditions of his employees, but he doesn't get along with them. They have basically antagonized each other. His workers doesn't like him because as the boss he is seen as a tyrant. And Mr. Thornton is indeed pretty ruthless at times, but he works very hard and he's very involved with everything that happens in his factory. On the other hand, Margaret comes from an aristocratic family on the side of her mother, but her mother was actually disinherited when she married her father. And Margaret is indeed the typical southerner, sheltered woman. However, she is very open-minded, and once they move and Margaret sees the working conditions of the mills and the living conditions of Milton, she begins to advocate for the workers' rights. She even befriends one of the workers and his daughter. My favorite thing about this novel is how Mr. Thornton is presented as this very masculine man, but he allows himself to be vulnerable. And at times he is even more vulnerable than Margaret. Another thing that I like about him is that he is trying to get an education, even when everyone tries to discourage him from doing it, because everyone in Milton, what they value is the ability to make money. So it doesn't matter if you are not educated, the only thing that matters is that you're capable of making money. He also refuses to do illegal things when everyone else is doing those stuff to enrich themselves. And at one point he even does something very selfless and heroic to help Margaret, even though he is upset with her. There is some angst because Mr. Thornton thinks Margaret doesn't like him, but especially because of the reasons why he thinks she doesn't like him. Although he is wealthy and Margaret is basically from the lower middle class, he believes she sees him as her inferior because he's not educated. The relationship has to be one of the most intense and passionate I have seen in a historical novel. The tension is very tangible when they are in a room full of people. Ultimately, this story shows that for things to work, not only in a romantic relationship, but in life in general, we must always overcome our prejudices and treat people as equals, because otherwise we will be fighting all our battles alone. And we cannot do that because we will lose the battle or we will win, but the victory is going to be bitter at the end because we will be alone. The next work on my list is An Ideal Husband by Oscar Wilde. This is not a novel, it's a play, but I read this every year because whenever I'm sad or depressed, this play never fails to make me laugh. This story is about a married couple of aristocratic people who are very active in society. And they are the embodiment of genuine respectability. And this is very important because in Victorian era England, everyone was supposed to look respectable even if their actions were questionable in their private lives. There was a striking contrast between the private and public affairs. In this story, Gertrude and Robert are the couple everyone envies because they have never been involved in a scandal. Hence, their reputation is clean and intact. They are actually rather progressive. Gertrude is a feminist and she advocates for women's education, and Robert works for the government. So all is well until the infamous Lady Shifley arrives in town and she tries to blackmail Robert into doing something against his convictions. The thing is that Robert was involved in an illegal scheme in the past and this is how he built his wealth and status. But Lady Shifley knows his secret. So the conflict revolves around Robert's predicament on whether he should ruin his reputation or participate in Lady Shifley's scheme. His friend Lord Goren is there to help him, and he actually ends up being the protagonist and hero of the story. Lord Goren is the opposite to Robert. He is a dandy and his public life is very hedonistic. This is all very intentional. This is the image he wants to project to the world, and he wants to look indifferent to everything, but privately he's actually very caring. He's a good friend. I decided to include this play in the list because I think it offers a good commentary about relationships and love. It tells us that when we hold very high expectations, we are actually being unfair to ourselves and to our partners. In the Victorian era, there was this very Puritan idea that if your husband did something wrong, you were to be blamed for his behavior because it was your job as his wife to moderate your family and to guide them into good conduct. Gertrude, for instance, wants to divorce Robert once she discovers what he has done. And her reason is because she is ashamed of him, but she's especially ashamed of herself for allowing this to happen. And remember, she is a feminist, but the social conventions of the Victorian era are so strong that she feels guilty of her husband's behavior. She's also being unfair to him because this is his only mistake. He is portrayed as this perfect man who has done nothing wrong except this one single mistake. So this play teaches you that you should never put your partner on a pedestal because we are all human and we should be allowed to make mistakes. So we shouldn't idealize people, we shouldn't idealize relationship, we shouldn't idealize romance. I think this play is about acceptance and understanding that there is no such a thing as an ideal husband or as an ideal wife or as an ideal partner. The only ideal partners are those who are real and those who are not an idealized version of a person. The next book on this list is Orlando by Virginia Woolf. So this is not a love story per se, but I decided to include this on the list because I think Orlando is a node to love. To create Orlando, Virginia Woolf was inspired by Vita Sackville West, who is believed to have been her friend and lover. And I think the novel is about acceptance and loving yourself. So in modern terms, Orlando is basically transgender slash non-binary. Orlando transforms into a woman, but she doesn't change her name. So I will refer to Orlando with the pronouns they, them to simplify the matters. So this is a historical novel with some magical realism elements. And don't expect the magic to be explained because it's very symbolic, like in the picture of Dorian Gray. So this is how the synopsis goes. First masculine, then feminine, Orlando begins life as a young 16th century nobleman, then gallops through the centuries to end up as a woman writer in Virginia Woolf's own time. Written for the charismatic bisexual writer Vita Sackville West, this playful mock biography of a chameleon-like historical figure is both a right commentary on gender and, in Woolf's own words, a writer's holiday, which delights in its ambiguity and capriciousness. So at the heart of this story is the fluidity of gender and sexual orientation and how this fluidity is fundamental to survive in an ever-changing world. Orlando basically attains immortality by reinventing themselves. The novel shows that times change and that social conventions change with them. So we should not adopt these conventions and make them part of our being because they are not permanent. If you stick to those conventions and refuse to change, you will cease to exist once those conventions die. In the end, the only permanent thing is who you are and that you should be able to live without social restraints. Orlando never questions the changes within themselves. They just accept them and move on. Orlando is about being whoever you need to be and whoever you feel like being. There is also this idea that if you accept who you are, others won't question your identity, and which we know it's not always the case. Still, when we accept ourselves, it little matters what others think about us. Having that confidence is essential to start and maintain a relationship. If you have self-respect, you will know when someone truly loves you, but you will also have the strength to quit a relationship when someone doesn't accept you. Orlando's story conveys this idea. After experiencing heartbreak, they go on a journey of self-discovery before finding love again. So this is a very beautiful novel. I love the way it is written, and it's very progressive for the time in which it was written. The next book on the list is Devil in Winter by Lisa Kleypas. I talked about this book in one of my previous videos, but I decided to include it here because it is one of my favorite romance novels. This belongs to the Wildfell series, but you don't need to read the other books in order to understand what is happening here. In fact, this was my first book of Lisa Kleypas, and I read this before reading the other two. This story takes place in the early Victorian era, and it is a marriage by convenience and an enemies to lovers story. Our protagonists are Evie and Sebastian. So Evie is an heiress whose family is plotting to steal her fortune. They beat her, they keep her locked, and they want to force her into marrying her cousin. Her father is also dying, and they don't allow her to visit him. Sebastian is a viscount, but he is ruined because his father wasted their fortunes and none of them work. In the previous novel, Sebastian does something very awful to Evie's best friend so he can re-establish his fortune. So Evie doesn't hold him in high esteem, but also Sebastian's reputation precedes him. He is incredibly handsome, but he has slept with everyone. He is a mixture of Lord Henry and Dorian Gray, but he has a specific moral codes. He is not like one of those villains who is only a villain in appearance. No, Sebastian is incredibly charming and witty, but very problematic. But the thing is, Evie knows Sebastian needs the money and she needs to escape from her family to see her father. At this point, she doesn't care about her fortunes. She just wants to see her father, to see him before he dies. So she goes to see Sebastian to strike a deal with him. She tells him they can marry, he can have her money, he can continue his life of excess and have his lovers and mistresses and whatever, on the condition that the marriage will be only a marriage in name and that he will allow her to spend time with her father. Sebastian agrees and they go on a journey to Gretna Green to get married. For those who don't know, Gretna Green was the Las Vegas in the Victorian and Georgian eras because it is located in Scotland, and since it is another jurisdiction, people can get crazy and wild and get married and it doesn't matter. One of the things that I really enjoy about this story is that there is no insta love. Both protagonists are very handsome and eventually become attracted to each other, but it takes time for both of them to fall in love. Also, there's the question that Evie thinks that her friend will not forgive her if she falls in love with this guy because of what he did to her. And she knows her friend will forgive her for marrying him because she will understand the conflict she was facing with her family, but she feels very guilty about her attraction towards Sebastian. Also, Evie is protecting her heart because she knows this dude has the worst reputation ever. One of the things that I love about this novel is that there's so much romance. The protagonists spend so much time together. The other thing that I love is the theme of redemption because Sebastian works very hard to change. And also, he doesn't really change because he is in love with Evie. Both things happen simultaneously. Everything that's happening with her are making him see that he needs to be a better man. Not just for her, but for himself. So I really like how the author dealt with that. The last book on my list is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. And I included this book on the list because compared to her sisters, I feel that Anne Bronte is often unappreciated. And this is a great Gothic novel. In this novel, Anne Bronte subverts some of the gender roles and tropes that we often see in Gothic fiction. Our protagonists are Gilbert and Helen. Helen is a mysterious woman who arrives in the town where Gilbert lives. They become friends and gradually fall in love, but there's much speculation about Helen because no one knows where she comes from. One of the most interesting things about this novel is that Gilbert is a pretty normal guy. Here, the Byronic character is Helen. She's brooding and mysterious. She is the one who has a dark secret, and because of this, Gilbert's attraction to her threatens to ruin his reputation. And as you already know, in the Gothic, the woman is the one who is usually virtuous. Still, in this novel, Helen is the Mr. Rochester of the story. Of course, things are more complex than they actually seem, and we gradually learn about Helen's past and her reasons for keeping it secret. Another thing that I love about Ellen is that she is a painter and she is an independent woman, which is something very uncommon in these historical romance novels. But of course, all of this raises red flags in the community, but Gilbert refuses to believe in gossips until something happens and Gilbert too begins questioning Helen's moral integrity. The story is about prejudices and compassion and about how not everything is what it seems. When Gilbert realizes that Helen might actually be a disgraced woman, he is very angry and brokenhearted. Still, he fights against those feelings and gives her a chance to explain herself. This story is also about how women in this society are also expected to suffer, because being meek and accepting your lot in life, it's what people consider respectable. If you don't do it, you must face the consequences and be ostracized for choosing to be free and safe. So those were my suggestions inspired by St. Valentine's Day. If you have read any of these novels, or if you're planning to read them, let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to those who subscribe to my channel, and for those who are supporting me with their comments. You are all very nice, and I'm feeling very glad to have this space where I can talk about the things I love and to meet people who like the same things that I like. Have a good week. Bye!